Carlos Alcaraz is getting fed up. On Monday night, for the second round of Indian Wells 2026, he dropped the first set, went a breakdown in the second, twisted his ankle, and still won the match comfortably. Then he sat in the press conference room later and said something about his opponents that every player on the tour should probably hear. The world number one is getting tired of something, and it has nothing to do with losing. Arthur Rinderknech came into the third round at Indian Wells, ranked 26th in the world, and carrying the kind of form and confidence that big serving players find when the outdoor hard courts of California are fast and the evening air is cool. He had not won a match at Indian Wells in 3 prior appearances at the tournament. He had a first-round bye and advanced to the third round on a walkover after Juan Manuel Cerundolo withdrew injured, which means he arrived on Stadium 1 on Monday night, having not hit a competitive ball in competition since before Indian Wells began. None of that context made him an easy opponent, because Rinderknech, when his serve is working, is one of the more physically demanding players to face on fast hard courts. He is 6'4". He hits the ball flat and deep, and his willingness to come forward and attack short balls makes him the kind of opponent who punishes any tentative play from the back of the court. He was also motivated by the specific occasion in a way that aligned exactly with what Alcaraz would describe afterward in the press conference. Rinderknech had been on the ATP Tour for years without producing the major result that would change the conversation about where his ceiling is. He has won challenger titles, reached a Masters 1000 final at Shanghai in 2025, and he has the game on his best day to compete with anyone in the top 10 on a fast surface. But the career breakthrough, the result against a truly elite player in the later stages of a significant tournament, had not arrived. Monday night at Indian Wells presented the specific opportunity that players in Rinderknech's position wait for, and he arrived ready to take it. On paper, this was not a dangerous match for Alcaraz. In practice, it nearly went wrong in the kind of specific way that only happens when you are the world number one and your opponent decides that this is the match of his week, maybe of his month. Rinderknech served with power and precision from the first game. He produced 11 aces across the match. He moved forward at the right moments and closed the net well. He won the first set tiebreak after Alcaraz had battled back from 2-5 down to level at 6-6 and then earn a set point, only for a wayward forehand to give Rinderknech the chance to close it out. He did, winning the final 2 points and taking the set. He then broke Alcaraz's serve in the opening game of the second set to go a set and a break up against the world number one, the defending champion, the man who had not lost a match since November. For about 20 minutes at the BNP Paribas Open on Monday night, Arthur Rinderknech was the best player on the court. Alcaraz responded with an immediate breakback, and then began to do what he does in these situations better than almost anyone in the history of the sport. He raised his level. He started hitting through Rinderknech rather than trading with him. He became more aggressive on return, shortened his backswing, took the ball earlier, and started to push the Frenchman progressively further behind the baseline with the accumulation of weight and pace from the forehand side. He broke to lead 4-2 in the second set, and did not give Rinderknech another look at a break point in the entire match. The second set went 6-3. The third set, after an ankle twist in the early stages that caused visible concern among his team and prompted him to call the physio, went 6-2. The match finished at 6-7, 6-3, 6-2 after 2 hours and 15 minutes. He is 14-0 for the season. He has won 32 consecutive matches on outdoor hard courts, a run that stretches back to Miami last year. After the match, Alcaraz sat in the press conference and was asked about the difficulty of the first set and the early stages of the second. What he said opened up a conversation that was more interesting than any discussion of the match itself. To be honest, sometimes I get tired of feeling like I'm playing against Roger Federer in every round. All of my opponents are playing their best tennis against me. If they played at that level every match, they would be much higher in the rankings. That statement is worth unpacking properly because it contains several layers of meaning, and because it is one of the more honest things any world number one has said in a press conference about the specific psychological reality of occupying the top position in the sport. The first layer is the observation itself. He is not complaining about his opponents being good. He is observing, with a mix of admiration and exhaustion, that every player he faces at a tournament arrives to play him at a level they do not consistently produce against anyone else. Rinderknech, who has never won an ATP title on the main tour and whose career high ranking sits in the mid-20s, played tennis on Monday night that was genuinely difficult to handle in the first set. His serve was working at a level he does not always find. His net approaches were precise. His decision-making was sharp. He looked like a player executing a specific game plan with high accuracy under significant pressure. Against anyone else in the top 10 that night, the first set performance Rinderknech produced would have been considered very good. Against the world number one in the third round of a Masters 1000 he is defending, it nearly took the set and a break. The second layer in Alcaraz's observation is the thing he chose not to say explicitly, but that sits underneath the comment clearly enough. He understands why it happens. Being the world number one, particularly at 22, with 7 Grand Slams, and a personality that the sport has built its promotional identity around, means that every opponent who faces him has elevated stakes. The match is the biggest of their week. For many of the players Alcaraz faces in the early rounds of tournaments, it is the biggest match of their month or their season. They prepare specifically for him. They study his patterns. They game plan for the specific moments they know will be decisive. And then they play with the freedom of someone who has nothing to lose, because the expectation is Alcaraz wins, and any competitive performance from the other side is already considered an overachievement by everyone watching. There is a specific dynamic that operates at the very top of the sport that sits underneath Alcaraz's observation and that anyone who has watched professional tennis closely enough will recognize. A player in the 26th position in the world carries into every match they play against the top 10 a set of expectations from their team, their sponsors, and from themselves that produce a particular kind of pressure. Against other players in similar ranking positions, that pressure is symmetrical, and both players feel the weight of it equally. Against Alcaraz, the dynamic inverts completely. Rinderknech on Monday night was free in a way he is not free in most of his matches. The outcome the world expected was that Alcaraz would win. Any competitive performance from Rinderknech was a bonus. Any set taken, any tight tiebreak, any extended rally that pushed the world number one around the court represented something approaching success. That freedom, paradoxically, can generate the best tennis a player produces all season, because the internal pressure is removed and replaced with the specific electricity of playing the biggest match available to you on the tour. The Federer comparison is not accidental, and Alcaraz chose it deliberately. Federer, across his years at the top of the sport, repeatedly described the same phenomenon in press conferences with characteristic candor. He said opponents seemed to elevate their game when they played him, that it was a combination of the motivation the occasion generated and the freedom that came from having nothing to lose. Nadal experienced it at Roland Garros, where players who had barely won a match on clay all year would suddenly produce extraordinary performances in the first week, simply because the draw had placed them on his court. Djokovic experienced it at the Australian Open across a decade of dominance, where the specific combination of his record at Melbourne Park and the motivational weight it placed on opponents created some of the most unexpectedly competitive early-round matches of his career. Alcaraz is now inside that same experience at 22, and the pattern that Federer and Nadal and Djokovic each described at the height of their powers is appearing in his matches with the same regularity. The price of being the best player in the world is that everyone else decides their best is the minimum acceptable standard when they stand on the other side of the net. The ankle twist in the second set is worth addressing separately because it was the moment of greatest concern on Monday night, and because Alcaraz's response to it was characteristic of how he manages adversity during matches. He stepped awkwardly on a ball mid-rally, his right ankle rolled, and he slowed noticeably for several points afterward. His team in the box reacted visibly. He called the physio. He had the ankle strapped and then, within minutes, was moving laterally at full speed again, breaking Rinderknech's serve in the opening game of the third set and taking control of the match from that point without any further visible restriction. He said after the match that he moved perfectly in the third set and that he was hopeful that by the next day it would be like nothing had happened. The fact that a player managing an ankle scare in the middle of a match he was a set down in went on to win the third set 6-2 without dropping his serve tells you something about the depth of the physical and mental resources Alcaraz brings to individual matches. There is also a statistical dimension to Monday night's result that deserves its own moment. Alcaraz now holds the second highest win percentage of any active player when losing the first set, according to information shared by the BNP Paribas Open during the broadcast. He has made a career of comebacks, not just the dramatic five-set variety, but the more common and more demanding pattern of falling behind early, absorbing the pressure of a motivated opponent playing well, and then finding the adjustment that turns the match. The Roland Garros 2025 final, where he came back from 2 sets down against Sinner to win in 5 in the longest final in French Open history, is the most visible example, but it is one point on a much longer line that runs through his entire career. The comeback is not a surprise in Alcaraz's matches. It is a pattern so consistent that it begins to look like a deliberate choice, an approach to matches where the pressure of expectation is managed by allowing the opponent their early momentum, and then systematically dismantling it. The match also extended his head-to-head record against Rinderknech to 6-0 across their career meetings, in which Rinderknech has now lost 11 of his last 12 sets against the world number 1. Those numbers tell a story about the gap in class between the two players that the Monday night match barely hinted at in the first set. What makes the statistic interesting is that Rinderknech is not a player who has been passive or conservative in any of their meetings. He arrives and he competes, and he uses his serve and his net game to generate pressure. He just cannot sustain that level for the length of a full match against a player who can raise his own level at any moment the match demands it. There was one other exchange from Alcaraz's press conference on Monday night that added a completely different color to the evening's proceedings. He was asked whether it was true that he had been more nervous about a competition happening at Indian Wells that had nothing to do with the tennis. He confirmed it. His brother Alvaro, who is also part of his coaching team, had been competing in the Hottie Coach of the Year tournament organized by Andy Roddick among ATP circuit members at Indian Wells during the first week of the event. He said he was probably more nervous than in his own tournament. He said it was funny that many players were watching and following the results. He said he was happy that his brother won the award. The image of the world number 1 sitting in his player box at one of the biggest tournaments on the calendar, watching the Hottie Coach of the Year bracket unfold with more anxiety than he feels about his own matches, is one of the more revealing glimpses of who Carlos Alcaraz actually is off the court. The competitive fire extends to his family across every available format. He now faces Casper Ruud in the 4th round. Ruud is the 13th seed and came through his own third-round match with a 3-6, 6-3, 6-4 win over Valentin Vachereau after dropping the first set, a result that showed both his resilience and the kind of inconsistency that has kept him from advancing deeper in the Masters 1000 events this season. The head-to-head between Alcaraz and Ruud stands at 5-1 in Alcaraz's favor. The single Ruud win coming in the 2022 Miami Open, when Alcaraz was 19 years old and yet to win his first Grand Slam. Since then, the matches have gone Alcaraz's way with increasing ease. At the 2022 U.S. Open final, when both players were competing for the world number one ranking in addition to the title, Alcaraz won in 4 sets in a match that was more comfortable in the end than the scoreline suggested. The 2023 and 2024 encounters were progressively less competitive. Ruud is a clay court specialist by nature and by training. He generates some of the heaviest topspin in the men's game from the backhand side, and his forehand, while less dominant, has become a genuine weapon since his run to multiple Roland Garros finals began in 2022. On outdoor hard courts, at the speed Indian Wells currently produces, Ruud's natural tendencies are somewhat less dangerous than they are on a slower surface. But he is an intelligent player who adjusts well, and who will arrive in the 4th round having thought carefully about how to use his game against Alcaraz. The head-to-head record is one-sided enough that Alcaraz is heavily favored. Whether Ruud produces another version of what Rinderknecht showed in the first set, that specific combination of freedom and motivation that comes from facing the best player in the world with nothing to lose, will be the interesting question. The broader picture around Indian Wells, as Alcaraz moves into the second week, is one the entire tennis world has been monitoring since January. He has progressed further and further into each tournament without finding the match that genuinely tests him for a full 3 sets from beginning to end. Rinderknecht gave him the most competitive opening set of his 2026 season on Monday night, and Alcaraz responded by adjusting tactically mid-match, managing an ankle scare that would have slowed many players significantly, and winning the deciding set without being broken once. The 14-match winning streak is now the longest active streak on the men's tour by a substantial margin. The record he is chasing is still 27 matches away. Between here and there is a second week at Indian Wells, a full tournament at Miami, and then the clay season beginning in Monte Carlo. The opponents will keep arriving, having game plans specifically for him, ready to play the tennis of their lives because the occasion of facing the world number one demands it. He said he is tired of feeling like he is playing against Federer every round. He said it with the half-smile of someone who understands the territory he occupies and accepts it alongside everything else that comes with being the player everyone is chasing. He knows the alternative. The alternative is not being the player everyone is chasing. At 22, with 7 Grand Slams and a winning streak that is still growing, that alternative is not one he will need to consider for a long time yet. Drop your prediction in the comments for the Alcaraz vs. Ruud 4th round. I want to know whether you think anyone gives him a serious match before the semifinals. The ankle twist in the second set is worth addressing separately, because it was the moment of greatest concern on Monday night, and because Alcaraz's response to it was characteristic. He stepped awkwardly mid-rally, his right ankle rolled, and he slowed noticeably for several points afterward. His team in the box reacted visibly. He called the physio, had the ankle strapped, and then within a few minutes was moving laterally at full speed again, breaking Rinderknecht's serve in the opening game of the 3rd set, and taking control of the match from that point without any further visible restriction. He said after the match that he moved perfectly in the 3rd set, and that he was hopeful that by the following day it would feel like nothing had happened. The fact that a player managing an ankle scare in the middle of a match he was a set down in went on to win the 3rd set 6-2 without being broken tells you something about the depth of both physical and mental resources Alcaraz brings to individual matches when the situation demands it. The match also confirmed a statistical dimension of his career that has become one of the most reliable predictors in tennis. Alcaraz holds the 2nd highest win percentage among active players when losing the 1st set. The comeback is not a rarity in his matches. Across his career, it has become a pattern so consistent that it begins to look deliberate, an approach where the pressure of expectation is managed by allowing the opponent their early momentum and then systematically dismantling it from the second set onward. The Roland Garros 2025 final, where he came back from 2 sets down against Sinner to win in 5 in the longest final in French Open history, is the most famous example. But the list is long and runs across every surface and every round, including multiple matches at this Indian Wells tournament over the years. He goes down, he adjusts, he wins. That cycle has become as recognizable a feature of his matches as his drop shot or his net approach. The match also extended his head-to-head record against Rinderknecht to 6-0, in which the Frenchman has now lost 11 of his last 12 sets against the world number 1 across their 6 meetings. Those numbers reflect the gap in class between the two players that the Monday night match only partially suggested in the first set and tiebreak. What makes the record more interesting than a simple ranking gap would explain is that Rinderknecht is not a passive opponent. He arrives and competes and uses his serve and his net game to generate real pressure. He simply cannot maintain that pressure for the length of a full match against a player who operates at a level he cannot consistently reach and who adjusts the moment the match demands it. Let me see what you think in the comments. Thanks for watching.